Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. This show is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, a London-based company where we help teams and organizations transition to an office-optional approach. To have a look at what we do and the show notes to our podcast episodes, head over to virtualnotdistant.com. Thank you for spending your time with us. Hello and welcome to episode 206 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. I'm Pilar Orti, and today with me is co-host Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello.
I always like it. I always leave it like, I think you're going to start saying something and it's always like this. Hello.
No, I'll just say hello and then I'll say lots more things later.
I like it, from across the pond. So listeners, if this is the first time you're listening, I don't know if you know that Maya and I are located in different countries. I am in London and Maya is in Spain. So I think it's quite funny.
Well, yes, given that we both come from the opposite place, then.
Yes. Wonderful. So we are starting to transition. We're all about transitions at Virtual Not Distant, but we are starting to transition the podcast to focus even more on managing virtual teams, on online collaboration, remote work, and we are also introducing new segments, new sections. So just before I forget, because I always forget, Maya, to tell listeners that they can access the show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. There they can access the show notes to all of them. And also, if you are listening to this from the player on our website, you might want to subscribe in a podcast app. One place you can go to Spotify, another one is Apple Podcasts, formerly iTunes, but there's loads of others. And subscribe, because if you subscribe to our show, then you can listen to us every other week or even every week if we start releasing mini episodes in between. So I always forget to say that, Maya, so I thought we'd do that now before moving on to our first segment.
Yes.
So quite a few things, Maya. One of them is an article that you shared after our previous episode together. So I think that was 203, where we looked at, one of the things we looked at was the introversion, what it means and what people think it means, etc. And then you found an article just probably after we'd finished recording, typical, and you sent it through and you said, look, can you just remind us? Can you remind us of what it was about? It was
it was an article from Buffer, wasn't it? That's the one we're looking at.
So it's called. I'll just give it out for listeners. Sorry, Maya, I interrupted. So 10 reflections on Buffer's 10th team retreat, and Maya will stick the link in the show notes. So sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, obviously this was just one reflection that leapt out of me from the 10, and the whole thing is well worth reading because Buffer really know about remote teams. They work globally and they've been doing this for a long time. But this was about their retreat, which I think they do once a year, of trying to bring the whole company of nearly 90 co-workers together. And it was the point they were making in the article is that, the heading of this subheading is Retreat Week really favours the extroverts, which is interesting because we've been looking at the correlation between introversion and remote working, and we called out some negative judgments about that in our last conversation. But obviously, if you are having a face-to-face retreat, that means getting together, usually over a fairly short time, and spending a lot of quite intense, concentrated time in the company of other people that you might not see face-to-face at all, maybe for a year, and a sense that you need to make the most of that time for both working purposes and social interaction. And so I thought it was a really interesting point, and it does reflect my own feelings as an introvert about intense personal interaction. And the thought of doing that with a team of 90 is a bit overwhelming just to think about.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I was like, oh yeah, I never thought of that actually. I think probably because I haven't been in something like that for ages. I know conferences really. At one point, I just have to stop and sit in a corner, because there's just too much. So just one. What was it that I? Oh yeah, they said that so. During the retreat, it says that they build a lot of breaks into the schedule, and this is really good. I mean, the thought that goes into it, and like Maya was saying, if you are a remote company, or indeed if you are putting together some kind of away day or company retreat, even have a look at this article because it really has a lot of stuff in it.
Definitely. They've got this nailed. It's what they do. Their CEO is introverted, they point out in this article. So they have managed to build in, as a result of that. I do think there is a tendency, if we do work remotely, when we do get together, to massively overschedule and over-expect in terms of what we're going to get done, what we're going to talk about, whether we're going to workshop this or socialize about the other in every spare moment. And there can be a tendency to overlook those really necessary recharging breaks for us introverts, where you just need to not be in face-to-face interaction.
Yeah, really good point. So finally, just listeners, if you do like reading, do subscribe to Buffer's blog. The company, it's called open.buffer.com is the URL. So yeah, do subscribe. You can subscribe by email. This is really amazing. Another article that is just from the 15th of July, 2019. So this What's Going On segment might always be about a month or two behind, but hey, hopefully it's relevant enough still. And it's the news that Santander, which is, it's actually a Spanish bank, but they have loads of branches in the UK. Santander brews up the first UK work cafe for small businesses. And this is in ITV News. ITV is a television channel. And I just thought, wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I couldn't work out from this article exactly where it fit on the continuum between sort of an incubator for a startup, because they're offering banking services as well, through to a kind of co-working space or somewhere in between. But it just feels very innovative and interesting, and of course, we all get our best work done with some good coffee.
And I thought, wow, another place that we can think of if our organization is starting to transition to remote. Another place where, because this is really curating for, maybe they'll start to curate for a certain kind of business professional also.
It's definitely a new space. The quote from the head of retail and business banking at Santander UK said, "More than a cafe and more than a bank, the Work Cafe is a whole new banking experience, acting as a vibrant hub for local businesses and the local community." So there we go. It's describing it as a new banking experience. So I'm seeing it as that they're seeing it as a bank first, but with a coffee shop attached or something. Interesting.
And the quote you read there, also the focus on local.
Yes, and something about the community. Yeah, I like that.
And it's again this opportunity that remote work offers, is that you can decide whether you want to spend more time in your local community or if you want to spend more time in your workplace local community, whatever that may be. So really interesting that I really always find fascinating how the internet and technology is being used actually to promote more activity in a local environment. Yeah. So now, because we can work from anywhere, we can actually spend more time where we live if we choose to.
And it's also just interesting to see how banking is evolving, that they're closing branches in the UK, but the ones they're keeping, they're adding these new community aspects and layers of functionality to kind of ground them in the local area. So that's an interesting evolution to keep an eye on too.
Yes, and the fact that if you want your business to continue, I was going to say to thrive, but not even then, if you want it to be sustainable, it's interesting how they're looking beyond their service and their core offering. Now they're offering these spaces. And also it's such great marketing, isn't it?
It's brilliant, yes. And it will bring new people in to Santander. It doesn't sound like it's limited to their customers at all, except that if you do have their card, you get a discount on the coffee. But they're encouraging people to come in and use it. And obviously that will be a good sales funnel for them, for local startups. So win-win.
Wonderful. So listeners, if you come across one of these places and you pop in, let us know how it went. Or if you come across any articles that reflect this kind of initiative, let us know. Something that's very interesting since we started this show, right from the very beginning, was that the co-working space, of course, has always gone pretty much hand in hand with the remote work, of course, with the freelance work. And it's really interesting how the spaces are evolving at the same time.
Yeah.
Good. So what else? What else is going on? There's more going on. I've got this checklist in Trello, and of course, it keeps disappearing. While I pull up the board again, Trello users, I discovered something today when I was cutting and pasting some show notes, some guiding notes for the show. So Maya and I use Google Docs sometimes to work on our show notes together. So what are we going to talk about? And we write in the body of the doc, and we'd written the stuff in different colors. And of course, when you do cut and paste into the Trello board, which is all that I can use while I'm behind the microphone, of course the colors don't transfer over. So I thought, maybe if I italicize it. So I tried, and actually just italics didn't carry over. But Maya, do you know how to create italics in a Trello card?
No, I don't. Is it markdown with asterisks and things like that? Would be my guess, but I've never tried it.
Well, yes, it is. You're supposed to put an asterisk at either end of the sentence. Now, I don't know whether you can see it. I don't know, but I can't see it on my iPad. I just see the asterisks.
That's interesting, because I was looking at this board on my laptop earlier today, and I thought, she's managed to make it do italics in Trello. So it did format on the main browser, but on the iPad app, I just have asterisks around it. So it's Trello doing its best. It's not a word processor. So.
Great learning, though. Great learning that we think that everything works anywhere, and actually that's not true. So listeners, we hope that this little banter has inspired something. Right, okay, so we've learned something new today, but we still have the asterisk, so that'll be interesting. Right, and there was a reason why I was doing that, and it's to go to the list. So oh, yes, Microsoft Teams. So our friend Chris Slemp, who's been on the show a number of times and hopefully will continue coming back, had a post on the new accessibility feature from Microsoft Teams. And this is the Immersive Reader, which is and Maya, you're much more on top of this than I am, but I suppose this is to help people read all those conversations on Microsoft Teams. So anyone who has some difficulty reading it, there's now this function that you can adopt, which is the Immersive Reader, which just makes text cleaner in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I think it's a really important issue that it's good to see platform providers getting to grips with. Now we're becoming more and more text-driven. People just need to remember that that's not an optimal medium for everybody. And this has been criticised before. And we had Nick Steenhout on the podcast earlier this year talking about issues in Slack and other platforms. So it's great to see a major provider like MSTeams getting behind this and sorting it out.
Yeah, so Maya will stick a link to the YouTube video and do check it out. And also let us know of any concerns you have about the accessibility of some of the tools that we talk about, especially, or that you are using, and any updates and especially any things that you're seeing. Wow, this company, the people behind this tool are really thinking about me. It'd be great. So virtualnotdistant.com, we have a contact form there for long form comment. And one thing along the lines of this, listeners, I am looking, and we are looking for research or evidence or studies or even meta studies that start to look at how these platforms are helping or hindering teamwork. Because we are advocates, of course, we've come up with the concept of visible teamwork, which is all about open conversations, visible workflow, etc. However, the space is so new, the space as it is now, that we're just hoping that it works. And we're seeing how it works in some isolated cases, but I don't think we still have enough evidence. So please, if you can send some evidence through, we'd be really... I posted this on LinkedIn and I couldn't get anything that was specific what I was looking for. Lots of other stuff.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. We'll link to that as well. But yes, completely agree. In such a fast-moving space, it's really difficult because we try and keep on top of what's going on, hence the name of this new segment, and try and share with you what we see happening within the space. But in terms of evidence-based research, that's something that takes time simply to be planned and funded and carried out and reported. And that cycle is struggling to keep up with the speed of transition in the space. So anything you come across, we'd really love to see it.
And really interesting, the closest paper I came across was from 3 years ago, 2016, and it used Facebook with Google Hangouts. It was a very interesting mix. So even finding the right mix of what we're looking for is difficult.
Yeah, but 3 years, that just goes to show what a long time that is in this space. I mean, Google Hangouts, who's still using that?
Well, Dave, you see, maybe some of our listeners can send something through to another What's Going On segment, because I would love to know if anyone is using, I don't even remember what it's called, the new Google thing, which is like Slack. In fact, Maya, I need to talk to you about this because
yes, I know you did. You set up an account for the new Google Slack-like thing. Yes. And the thing is, this just reflects how the whole sector is converging and everybody is duplicating the functionality of everything else. And a few years ago, you would say, all right, we do Slack for our chat and we do meetings in Hangouts and we do email for documents or whatever. And now everything is doing everything. So it does get more confusing to talk about what we use, but it gives us more choice as to where we want to live online.
That's it. Right. So we've got lots of other articles, but they're for next episode. I did want to mention two things, though. One is I'm starting a West London meetup group in West London. So listeners, what are the chances that one of you lives or travels through West London? Because I'd like to have morning coffee with people who are leading virtual teams, managing remote teams, thinking a lot about remote collaboration, and just have a coffee with them. I found a lot of the meetups I go to, they have presentations, they have stuff, and I just think I just want to have a chat and have an in-depth chat, because I find that what happens with presentations and stuff like that and 15-minute talks, 20-minute talks is that you only go so far and they're usually very broad.
Yes, they took two questions at the end and then that's the conversation shuts down after that and moves on. That's
the time. That's the time we've got. And so so anyway, if you are in West London, that'll be great. I think I'm going to schedule the first one for the 1st of October, which is a Tuesday. And the other thing, we'll have more information on this, or maybe we've had already more information of this, depending on how recording goes, on the Minds at Work Lab. The Minds at Work movement are doing an event on healthy remote working, and it's a mixture of in-person and remote. So I don't know yet how that is working, but again, Maya will stick the link in the show notes. And this is happening on the 17th of September, also in London. So yeah, if you have any events you would like us to shout out about, let us know, and we'll happily do that.
Yeah, let us know in good time. With our fortnightly release presently, we want to make sure we get ahead of it and get the chance to promote your event and your links to support remote working.
Right, so that was that. That's quite a long what's going on, but I think I love it. You know, I do. I mean, my own preference, Maya, is I like shows that have lots of news. So, you know, you build your show in your image, I think. Sometimes.
Absolutely. And you build it as the world changes as well, because I don't think we could really have done this section sustainably a year or so ago. Just the sheer volume of what is going on in the remote space is exploding at the moment. So many different elements to it, so many different ways it's niching down for different people. And that's what's really exciting about it.
You are so right. You are so right. And that's what prompted, I think, the new section was, hang on, we've got all this stuff, especially on Twitter. People at Pilar Orti on Twitter at Virtual Teamwork with an O. And Maya, is your handle at Maya Middlemiss?
Yes, I'm at Maya Middlemiss everywhere, so easy to find.
Excellent. Good. So that's Twitter is such a great gateway. So another thing, so we're going now to the main topic of today's conversation. Another thing that I think we couldn't have looked at, especially when the podcast started in such depth, is collaboration platforms. And there's so much going on around them. There's so many popping out. There's so many things happening around them. There's so many dangers of them being talked about. Dangers of them being talked about. I mean, that we thought, okay, let's focus on that because it's really interesting, and it's something that I think Maya we're both very interested in because we use them so much also. And people love to talk about applications. So we thought we'd dedicate this chat between Maya and myself talking about chat-based platforms like Slack and Microsoft Teams. I think they are the big players, but the principles will carry over to almost anything you're using to continuously communicate with your team members, to continuously have those conversations in the open. So even sites like Basecamp or Asana, which are essentially project management tools, even though the conversations center around tasks, there's a lot of this that will be going on.
And so it's like that multifunctionality we were talking about in the earlier section. People who've built good project management tools find it relatively easy to bolt on that synchronous and asynchronous chat functionality to it too. So you can basically spend your entire working time there in their tool. It makes sense for them.
Yeah. So we thought we'd label this episode The Dangers of Collaboration Platforms. It's always fun to talk about stuff that goes wrong. But anyway, it's still early days. Very interesting that I think I saw a tweet by Product Hunt. It said the Product Hunt folks ask freelancers, what's a tool that's changed your life? And I don't know many of those, but one of them was Slack.
Yeah, Slack was up there in the top 2. And I think it's because Slack was probably the first one that was really built for business, I think, because I've been managing remote teams for a long time before Slack came along and tried so many consumer tools, things that were really built for socializing, like Skype and MSN Messenger and things like that. And then finally something came along that was really grown up and for business. So I can really understand why people thought of it as life-changing. I think I probably did too at the time.
Because I remember now, you used to have a Skype group, didn't you? That's how you communicated.
Yeah, all sorts of different things we tried with Skype. And Skype has changed a lot over the years as well, because I think when we started using it, it was a little Lithuanian startup or something. And now it's all part of Microsoft and being embedded into all of their tools. So it obviously things change all the time, but the evolution of sudden built for business platforms really did make a transformative difference. And I think at the time we tried out HipChat. I don't even know if that's still around, and Hall.
I think so.
But ended up with Slack because that seemed to be what everybody was going with at the time. And that was probably 4 or 5 years ago. I think they're still going strong.
Yeah, adoption. And also Skype for Business is, of course, being retired over the next couple of years because Teams, the platform that looks most like Slack, is being built to take over also.
And like Slack, it's going to do everything. You know, it's going to be the home for your conversations and your documents and your calls, and it's going to make you coffee. Maybe. I think that's a future release. So, yes, if you're listening.
Right. We know lots of people connected to Microsoft listening to the show. So if you have, what is it, the features queue or something like that?
Yeah.
My software language is not. Yes. So I thought we'd start with this article I found, which is actually from a couple of years ago. Let me see if Trello allows me to open it. Yes. And it's I was very excited to find this paper because there's a couple of things. One is that Slack, by some people, especially the people that are transitioning or maybe who are not even really a remote team, they just use these applications in their workplace, because this is, of course, Microsoft Teams hasn't even been built for remote. It's just been for Teams. So some conversations they still use Slack only for the banter and for the conversations that are not that important. And you still hear, okay, we've got these random channels and we do all these conversations. And then you get a sense that actually it's a fun thing that's over in the corner of their communication ecosystem. So I found this article called How Scientists Use Slack and in Nature. So I thought, wow, this is amazing. And it's actually from December 2016. So it's a few years old. And I was really excited because it shows that it can be used. Well, we know it can be used, but it just, for me, it gives it a different profile. The fact that it's being used for really meaningful and useful discussions. So I thought, yes, and I've made a note. I know you've made a note. You say something there. You were saying about the fact that because it's 3 years old.
Yeah, I mean, the way they use it now might have evolved since then. Certainly the tool has evolved and there's lots more different add-ons and things you can do with Slack. But I think there was a sense in the article about this being a really innovative way to do science and collaborate globally. And given the fact that science is an innovation practice, then I expect it's become a lot more routine now, and that, more and more people are expecting to use these collaboration platforms when they're working, not just within their own teams, but collaborating with research associates all over the world.
Yeah. And actually, I did get the sense of, not from the article, but from one of the users, that this was routine. Yeah. And I really like the fact that they highlight that the first thing that he did, it was a he in this case, was open Slack. And a lot of the times I feel that whereas many people will open email first thing as they log on, Slack will be left till later.
Yeah. Well, hang on. You mean you can close Slack and email? You see, maybe that's something that's changed a bit in a few years, the fact that I think that probably a lot of us now just have these things continuously on all our devices, whether we like them or not. But yeah, that sense that it's the first thing he checks when he starts a work session or whatever, that was a nice, and that does feel like an important transition from email.
Yes. And then they say how they were being used. So some channels were used to report on projects, others were to ask for help. So very much the place where you go to talk to others. They mentioned someone was using a tool I hadn't heard of. It's an open source tool. It's called Mattermost. And I looked a little bit into it, and I think I think mainly developers use it, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, that might be worth another look and thinking about for our tools section, because there are, as with everything else, there are lots of different ways of doing things that we need to do. But it's a case of finding out which one best fits your own needs and your own work, and whether this is something that's specifically for academic research or it might be a valuable tool that the rest of us could repurpose. I think we owe this a closer look.
I think it's interesting that it's open source, so therefore you can probably change stuff around it, can't you? That's interesting. And also they were saying that they often get the platform ready to, they use the platform to get a paper ready, so before they publish or before they submit. And the point they made was that that's faster than meetings.
Yeah.
And I really like that because an anecdote here, over the summer on Twitter, I posted a little doodle of our ecosystem, Maya. So what we use at Virtual Not Distant, and of course with Ross and collaborators. And Elise Keith from Lucid Meeting said, "Where are your meetings?" I thought, I didn't put the fact that we sometimes meet online. I put the recording thing for the podcast. And I think it was because I am so at the moment in the space where I'm trying to get people to understand that virtual teamwork does not just mean meetings.
Yeah.
That if you are working on a virtual team, there's the whole visible teamwork, which is where it makes it time agnostic also, not just location. So that I just pushed those meetings out of my head. And when you think about collaborating on a paper and getting feedback on a paper,
it makes total sense to do that in a shared platform where you actually create the document together rather than talking about it. And they mentioned faster than meetings. And I think the idea of it being I love that phrase, time agnostic. Definitely going to reuse that one. That's perfect, because the idea of asynchronous collaboration is often a little bit tenuous for people to engage with. It feels like something you're spending a lot of time waiting around for, and you might get stuck and not be able to progress things. But the idea that the time doesn't matter and that the progress can happen. Progress can happen on your paper while you're asleep if somebody on the other side of the world has a contribution to make. And you can think of time in terms of fixed deadlines and deliverables rather than, I'm going to do this on Thursday morning. I really like that.
Yeah, and we'll follow the episode outline for now, but we will talk about that asynchronous component, because that's often also missed out. So they also had a channel for conferences to share and to help. And this is quite interesting that one team had integrated Bonusly, which is this other application where you go and reward your teammates for stuff that you've seen them do. And some people will have money, but other people might win after certain points. They might have gift cards or whatever. So Bonusly is essentially a reward platform, and usually teams reward points. And I like that they had integrated that into Slack so that recognition was seen in that same space. So you don't have to now go to another platform to see who is being rewarded for what, but actually it's all coming into Slack.
Yeah, that's rather nice. It pushes it into people's stream of consciousness, a stream of alerts. That it ties in nicely with the content that we created earlier this summer about celebrations and just acknowledging sometimes the smaller bits. Bonusly can be used for things that people don't know that's going on, that somebody else has achieved or won or succeeded with, or that they want to thank somebody for publicly. And your collaboration platform's a perfect place to do that.
Yeah. And then another thing that I didn't know you could do was set reminders for the whole lab within Slack.
Yeah, I didn't know. I know you can do it for yourself in your own sort of Slack channel that's just you and you. You can put different alerts in, but I had no idea you could set reminders for other people. And I think that's really powerful and subversive.
Well, I wouldn't set them would I set them for other people? I would set them for the channel. So like team or whoever is in this, we all need to be aware that, there is that. But of course you can set them for other people. And that's where you start also that's where we see that these platforms, as much as they are great for setting up more self-organization within teams and less micromanagement, we know that they can always be used in a different way.
Yeah, and that sometimes you do need to sort of nudge other people or just kind of to get things done. And it's interesting, at the top of this section, we were talking about how traditionally project management type applications like Basecamp are now building in the chat functionality. And this is like the other way around. It's Slack building in some slightly kind of task-driven, work-driven functionality to keep people on track with reminders and notifications about the stuff that they said they'd do. And just, I do think that the way we're working these days, we don't have a big shared diary on the reception desk. We might not plan our work together in the same ways if we're independent professionals. And this is just another way of being accountable to each other and making sure if someone says, yeah, I'll do that, I could just set you a reminder as well. I can always cancel it if you've done the thing well ahead of the deadline. But I can see this being a very powerful thing that not many people know about. So use it only for good, people.
And because I hadn't thought of that, I hadn't thought of doing it for someone else. However, what happens then is that you are not, or for example, if you're managing, you are not the manager. It's not the one reminding someone else. It's the bot.
Yes.
And I think that can be good for relationships.
That's a nice emotional thing, isn't it? It's not the manager
looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, I really like. I have a similar thing with invoicing that I like to set up my invoicing app to send a reminder when something goes overdue. It's not me chasing the payment; it's the application. Sorry. I quite like the idea of the app reminding people to do stuff rather than the manager.
I want to share something here. I don't know if I've already shared it, so apologies. But anyway, if you've heard it, you probably heard it a very long time ago. And it's so I met someone, and I hope that she can come onto the podcast at some point. But I'm not going to name her because I haven't asked her if I can share this publicly. I'm sure she shared it in a talk, so probably. But she was saying that when she started, so she manages a remote team, part of an organization, and she was saying that when she asked people on Slack how the day was going or how they were doing, she didn't get as honest an answer as if a bot asked them. Have I shared this before with you in a recording?
I don't know if we've talked about it in a recording. We've definitely looked at some written evidence of this and reportage because, it is really interesting the way people will relate differently to an application rather than a person, particularly a person who they have a perceived hierarchical management relationship with. It's very different.
Yeah. I mean, this is such a huge topic, listeners. So if you have any opinions or if you work or you think a lot about this stuff, because I mean, the use of bots in the workplace, it's going to be a huge topic. Well, it is a huge topic now already. Let us know, because I mean, this could take us down a rabbit hole. So listeners, virtualnotdistant.com. Okay. And following on this, hang on, where are we going? So we're still in the beginning. Oh my God. Okay. So yes. So very interesting. Please read that article. They also use it for onboarding and also for blowing off steam, the social side. So very interesting. So another reason, Maya, why I thought it'd be good to look at that is that the collaboration platforms, they are being adopted by all sorts of teams in all sorts of ways. And now they're being used at an organizational level.
Yeah, that must be really weird. I've not done working in a big organization for so long that I can't imagine being on a Slack group with hundreds or thousands of people. Must get quite noisy and need a lot of management.
Yeah, in a way you have to start, it becomes almost like, for me, Microsoft Teams becomes like Yammer, which is, it suddenly becomes more about, there's more of a social thing, it becomes about, there's some teams that you're part of but don't really use. It can become a little bit daunting because suddenly you're not just opening an application and it's your team. It's suddenly there's all this other stuff around you.
Yeah, so like logging into Twitter or something and going,
Yeah, or going into an office and there's no walls and no floors. You just see everyone doing stuff all the time, and people throwing posts at you. So I think this is something that needs a lot of thinking. We're not going to go into detail now, but I think this is another thing to be thinking about, is that these, although they're being adapted and adopted, and maybe Teams was designed in this way, I don't know, but as where I see it, these are great team applications, and now you're asking for a lot of people to be using them, so there's a lot of danger in that. And okay, I'll leave it there. And with this, it comes at another, just following from what we were saying before also, as much as these applications are great for open conversations and stuff like that, when you have so many people on them, organizations then need to start taking control. So there'll be channels that only admin can post in. And stuff like that. And the first time I came across this, my heart really sank. I mean, I understand that it can get very noisy and, organizations can do what they want. But in my co-working space, we have a Slack, and I use the Slack almost more than the space.
That does surprise me. Yeah.
To find out what's going on. And the day I went into announcements and I saw that I couldn't comment on an announcement, I was like, and I actually, listeners, you're going to think that I really have no clue about what's going on. I actually contacted Slack and I said, how come this is possible?
You have a bug.
Yeah, something's not working. And I thought, that is a shame. Because you can also say, where is it? Infinite Red. We've talked about them here before. We have an episode with Jamin talking about how they use their Slack. They have a channel, and which is their checking in channel. Can't remember what it's called. And people go in and they say, "Hi, I'm here. I'm back. I'm for lunch." Blah blah. And that's all they're allowed to say. And they've agreed, and the expectation is that that's all you post.
Yeah, but they've done that by agreement, by consensus, and I think that's the big difference. And perhaps when these collaboration platforms started to emerge 4 or 5 years ago or whatever, I think it might even be 6 years with Slack, they were mainly used by the kind of startup, flexible, non-hierarchical distributed teams that perhaps associate with online work, but now increasingly much larger, more traditional, more structured different kinds of organizations and enterprises are adopting them, including these much larger ones. So maybe it's coming from that, this idea of controlling a channel down to the point that only an admin can post in it. I agree, that feels very, well, that's not what this is all about. And surely you could do this via a team agreement where you say, all right, we just use this channel for chit chat, or we only use this for announcements, and nobody comment in it other than to reply to a thread, for example, so that each top level message is a specific announcement. Those are the kind of things you could agree to do within the channel, but you could do that by agreement rather than control.
Well, and not even agreement. You might not agree, but I am setting the rules, and I'm asking you to not post here, only to reply or whatever.
And you can have somebody take responsibility for that kind of chat hygiene and come along and say, oops, I'm moving this to a thread. Or
exactly. And I think, or even saying, can you not post here, please, or removing. And, I think it's a shame. Anyway, a lot of people will disagree. Let us know, virtualnotdistant.com. And we understand, but it's just a shame because, again, it's this horror that I didn't see coming a few years ago when we started looking to this space, where for me it was a space where we could do things differently, and we're just translating a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we are. And we're bringing our time, virtual not distant, there's 2 of us plus various collaborators. We know that we sometimes bleed over into chatting in the wrong channel about the thing because we were carrying on a conversation or whatever. And it's very easy for these things to get quite disorganized just in our little Slack. And I can well imagine that if you've got hundreds or thousands of users, even though the search functions in Slack are quite good and people don't necessarily know about them or use them well enough, it could get very messy very quickly. So you probably either have to have rules or you have to have some kind of policing or facilitation, people to come along and say, oops, not here, please. Take that over there.
It needs all that, and that is a bit that is missed out sometimes. So we're going to adopt this. However, no one is going to do any of these things, which we need when there's lots of us. Come on, we're human. We know that as the larger our group gets, the more room for misbehavior and the more room for diversity of behavior and all of that. So it's fine to facilitate and even to manage a space.
Yes,
that's
and
fine.
It's an ongoing need, actually. It's a permanent overhead as the space grows. It's not about adoption and a learning curve. It's about that constant kind of hygiene, maintenance of the conversation and keeping it organized.
Yeah. So, and just building on that, we come to number 0.4. So, listeners, we are still in why we're talking about this. I think what we might do is after this point, we'll stop and we'll split the file and we'll have a separate file for you listeners, because in case you're downloading, so that you don't end up downloading 90 minutes, which is what I think this conversation is going to be. But that's okay. That's okay. We will do that. Tech allows us to split the conversations.
Depth rather than speed.
Yes. So we're talking a lot, and you were mentioning this chat-based conversations also. And I think one of the things that I'm finding difficult and want to try and change is the fact that Slack and Microsoft Teams, they are, of course, labeled as chat because they are a chat. They look like a chat. They can be used as a chat. But you can also think of them as notice boards, or forums, where you say something and you don't expect an immediate reply. And if in your team, we go back to agreement, or if the expectation in the organization is that that's okay, and that actually sometimes you either need time to digest, or you've decided not to communicate the same way that someone might not go into an office for a couple of days, that it doesn't need to be real time. And for me, the power of these tools is in the asynchronous, because a lot of the time, depending on where you are, so I'm going to make a massive generalization, but especially for companies that have remote workers in the same time zone, and who are not in very strange areas with bad phone and internet connectivity, if you start to type a lot, sometimes you might as well pick up the phone. Unless you're deliberately chatting so other people can see it. So that's a bit different. But if it starts being used like a chat, the open conversation is going to be really long, and actually you might as well just pick up the phone. But
and it's going to be really noisy and ongoing as well. And when are you going to do your work?
Conversing is work.
But you might have other stuff as well.
It's not the best way of using the work done by using the wrong tool. So I really see this, that some people are moving to other platforms to have asynchronous conversations than Slack, and I'm thinking, why?
It's a shame because the tools do all this, and I do think the word chat is a bit of a hindrance here, and I think it just reflects the way these things evolved, because they came out of a world a decade ago when we had email, which was very asynchronous. And in the early days, it could take a while for an email to kind of make its way across a city or something. And people had to dial in and get it or whatever and push notifications. And then we had this genre of things for consumers initially called instant messaging. And that implanted the idea of instantaneousness and constantly being synchronous and responding immediately. And that evolved into these chat-based professional platforms that we're using today. But we've got to get away from the word chat, because I think it creates a very unrealistic expectation that's not helpful in some cases about how to use it.
Yeah. So there's another article by Buffer again, which we'll link to, which is what happened when they turned off Slack. One of their teams turned off Slack on Fridays. And very interesting, what they said is that they started to talk in other places. And this led me to think that you don't, and this is another thing that I'm seeing people struggle with, and it's having conversations in those project management tools. So sometimes, just needless to say, if you've been a long-time listener, you'll know that Ross, our podcast polisher, we only talk to him on Trello. And every now and then, if something needs a phone call, but very rare, and an email, no. So you can also, if a conversation is better had it somewhere else, or in a Google document, an online document you're collaborating on, Buffer use, for example, Dropbox Paper, then move the conversation. And that should be part of understanding how you work best and where your communication is most useful, most productive.
Yeah, it's all part of our visible teamwork, things that we've been talking about in the training we're developing at the moment and things like that, isn't it? It's about where is this conversation going to add the most value, and sometimes keeping the conversation about the work with the work has a lot of benefits for its ongoing success.
So, Maya, you've got a note here which was supposed to be in italics, but it's between asterisks. Do you want to just wrap us up with that thought? And then, listeners, what we'll do is we will we'll chop this file here, and Maya and I will carry on talking, but you'll be able to download something else.
Okay, yeah. I mean, this was really just an ongoing thought that we need a better word for these platforms that we're using. Collaboration platform sounds very grand for something we can just use to message back and forth, but we need to get away from the idea of chat, and we need a new collective noun, I think, for all of these sets of tools, whether it's MSTeams or Slack or whatever is your poison. What should we call them? Because it can't be a chat app. So maybe you could tweet us at virtual, not distant, or virtual teamwork with a zero for the O, or tweet at Pilar Ortiz or at Maya Middlemiss with your ideas for what are we going to call our digital hubs, because we're spending all of our time here. As the scientist was saying, he puts on Slack first thing in the morning. That's where he kind of lives, and other things sprout off of that. That's clearly the way things are going. So we need a word for that. Our digital home, our online office. What do you call it? What do you think we should be adopting?
Well, listeners, she gave you all the places to go and tell us. And so that's it for this file. But we are just going to give you another file where we actually talk about the dangers of online collaboration platforms.